It is hate and nothing else in an unbroken line from Nixon to Reagan to Trump. Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. But I want to start out with last night's Republican convention. It struck me that what we were watching was the Nixon 1968 playbook being repeated. Roger Stone was advising Nixon, I believe, in 68. I know he was certainly advising him by 72. And Nixon's main pitch to Americans in 68 was America's on fire. Martin Luther King had been murdered a few months earlier, and there were riots across our cities, and lots and lots of footage on TV of black people rioting, and of course that was the stuff that Nixon was using to crank up white voters. And I was just seeing the same thing last night, and it seems to me, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. Number one, what your experience of watching last night was. There were a few moments, particularly early on, where I was thinking, some of this rhetoric actually is about things that are good and noble about America, some of our aspirations and goals. I'm not sure that they're unique to, in fact, I'm quite sure that they're not unique to the Republican Party. But, there was some kind of Reagan-esque rhetoric. But that was the thing about Reagan, is he cloaked brutal policies that just made rich people richer and richer and richer and crushed working people, destroyed their unions, destroyed their ability to have, any kind of equity in the workplace. He couched all of those just vicious policies, not to mention his vicious racism, in soaring rhetoric. He had really good speechwriters. And we saw some of that last night, but then it kind of devolved into warnings, fear and hysteria and demagoguery. I mean, the biggest fear seemed to be that black people are going to move into your white suburb. They had this couple on who, Black Lives Matter folks were marching to somebody else's house. They walked by the front of these people's house. Now, I know Fox News has put together this montage showing the metal gate to the community in which they live, which used to be a gated community. That metal gate fell apart a decade ago or so and just kind of, lays there next to the giant stone pillars that are the entrance to the community. But they shot pictures of it, kind of implying that these people had crashed a gate in front of these folks' house. No, they hadn't. It had nothing to do with these people's house. So Fox News put together this montage, which they played again last night. As if these people's house was under attack or they weren't. The reason that they were charged by the police with threatening is that they stood on their porch and they pointed their guns at people with their fingers on the trigger. That's against the law. But, this was their big fear. Oh my God, they mentioned suburbs. And Trump is tweeting, and Cory Booker is going to be in charge of it. Who's Cory Booker? Oh, yeah, that black senator from New Jersey. And then right behind that was their terror that the Democrats are going to raise taxes on millionaires and billionaires and use that money to pay for health care for low-income people, especially black low-income people. And, finally, they kept pointing to this, I put it in quotes, scare quotes, violence here in Portland. Now, I don't know any reasonable person who thinks that setting fire to things and damaging and defacing buildings is in any way productive. John Lewis was right. Martin Luther King was right. Peaceful protest is how you get the best results. Mahatma Gandhi was right. And the people in some of our cities who are burning things down, they're just wrong. It feeds the narrative that Trump wants. They are making Donald Trump's television ads. I get it. People are really upset. There's terrible stuff going on. We have, another fellow here, Jacob Blake, who was shot 7 times in the back in Kenosha, Wisconsin, day before yesterday. And now we learn that he's paralyzed from the waist down. It's outrageous. This is criminal. So by all means, get in the streets and protest this. But the message from Trump was that anybody who is protesting is also violent, which is a lie. We know that 99.9% of all the people who've shown up for all these protests have been totally peaceful. Black, white, everything in between, it doesn't matter. But you know, I can't tell you how many times I heard the word Portland. Maybe I'm sensitive to it because I live here, but it was like, oh yeah, okay. And who provoked that violence? You know, everything was settling down here in Portland after the George Floyd murder protests. Everything was just kind of calming down, winding down, and then Trump sends in the stormtroopers. But sadly, I think the thing that was saddest to me was the commentary afterwards, where the media was treating Trump in this weird parade of supplicants and family members, you know, which reminds me of Donald Trump Jr., you know, with his wild, bloodshot eyes. My guess is that he was just, you know, wearing contacts that didn't work well for reading the prompter at that distance. But, you know, there are people who think he was snorting cocaine or he's got COVID or God only knows what. But, you know, it was totally strange. But here was this parade of grifters and family members and all this kind of stuff that were basically treated by the media as if it was some sort of aberration. Oh, the Republican Party would never be like this. I remember a Republican Party that's been like this my entire life. This is what Nixon campaigned on in '68. Racialized fear. This is what Ronald Reagan campaigned on when the first speech he gave of his official presidential campaign was at the Nebosha County Fair in near Philadelphia, Mississippi, where 3 civil rights workers were murdered, speaking to an all-white crowd, talking about states' rights. A scenario, a scene that Donald Trump Jr. repeated in 2016, saying he was very proud that his first speech was right here at this county fair where Ronald Reagan gave his first speech. And he talked about, you know, to an all-white crowd about states' rights too. I mean, you know, Trump is making it clear that when he says law and order, he's talking about black people. Nixon didn't come right out and say that. But, you know, we figured out what he was talking about. Trump is talking about voter fraud, you know, and we've known since Reagan that meant stop Democrats from voting, particularly, you know, people of color and older voters who might vote Social Security and Medicare. Trump has openly called for the destruction of Social Security within 3 years. If the tax suspension of the Social Security Trust Fund tax that Trump has proposed goes into effect and lasts for 3 years, no more Social Security. And this is what Trump is promoting. And his party loves it. This is not a new party. This isn't the Trump party. This is the Republican Party of old. They've been fighting Social Security ever since it was passed in 1935. I mean, I think the good news is that Americans are waking up to this scam that Republicans have been running. People say, oh, Trump is so much worse. He's talking about staying in office beyond 8 years. Well, yeah, you know, talk is cheap. Trump is just saying out loud the stuff that Nixon and Reagan and Bush and Cheney were saying in code. Or do you think that this actually is dramatically different? I see this as the logical endpoint of the GOP.